I continue to find solace in and draw inspiration from our 1996 Constitution. With the graphic words of the preamble, when it declares that we, the people of South Africa, not the politicians, not our bosses, we, the people, are absolutely center stage of this freedom. It goes on to say that we recognize the injustices of the past, we honor those who have suffered for justice and freedom in our land. It says we respect those who have worked to build and develop this country, and believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it. But the most potent words for me is the last part that said, united in our diversity. Here it talks about the collective conscience of this nation. It declares that success in life should depend on people's choices, their effort and talents, not their circumstances at birth. 23 years into democracy, you just have to be born white, the chances are you are going to live in the southern suburbs. And you just have to be born black in Joburg, the chances are you are probably going to be relegated on the other side of the freeway in Alexander and in some informal settlement. Because the economic power patterns have been set for generations to come. Unless and until we, the people, do something absolutely interventionist to change the script. For me, South Africa's problems have nothing to do with the availability of resources. That I think we've got plenty of. Our problems stem from our inability to manage, plan, lead, coordinate, and organize. We've inherited a capitalist system, but we refuse to manage it. We have some of the world's greatest plans, like the Reconstruction and Development Programme, the best Marshall Plan in the world, because it had the commitment of labor, of civil society, business and government to reconstruct our country. But just after 3 years, we jettisoned it during the period of Thabo Mbeki, and we came with a growth, employment, and redistribution strategy, or GEAR for short, that labor had not signed up to. And since then, the strife began. Can we pick up one plan, stick with it, give it a chance to gain traction? Maybe, just maybe, we might make progress. So at some stage, I think it was General George Patton who observed that great wars are won by good execution, not just great plans, because good execution will save even a mediocre plan. So for me, business is a driver of both societal and economic progress. Business is a societal and social force for greater good, and must, as a matter of course, exert itself much more forcefully, especially where politics affects both confidence and investment decisions. But business has always had a disproportionate voice. I know of only 2 ways in which governments all over the world get their revenues. So this 1.144 trillion rands that we just collected in the last financial year, one, in the case of South Africa, comes from the 28% that is corporate taxes. The other comes from individuals employed by these same companies in PAYE. There is no other source of income whatsoever. For me, leadership, it's about being genuinely obsessed with the development of others. Broadly, leadership, it's about influence, it's about creating movement, not stasis. Therefore, it requires probably only three things. Some sort of a compelling vision so that people feel compelled to follow. Secondly, it requires some boldness. Nothing would ever be done unless there was gallantry, somebody who's valiant. And then lastly, integrity. So if you're the president, you can't say, but I've not done anything against the law. The standard is also morality and ethics. And that's the one sometimes we don't talk about. So it's very easy in business to talk about, but these are the plans that we have put together, these are the targets. This is our actual performance, and here's a gap. And sometimes we call that managing the gap. It sounds catchy. But when we really want to make a difference, can you imagine if we talked about reaching our people's ultimate potential? But when you talk about ultimate potential, to say the potential of this country, it's actually here, but the performance is here. So if you go back to the NDP, it says we ought to be growing at 5.4% to be able to absorb the 150,000 young graduates that get onto the job market, often with inappropriate skills. If we were to grow at 7%, we'd double the size of this economy in 5 years. At that time, then and only then, we could genuinely talk about the redistribution of wealth, because everything else will be the redistribution of poverty. So really what we try and do in business, and the professors talk about the VUCA world, it's to manage only two things: uncertainty and ambiguity to a point. If it's up to me, it's up to me, especially when you're lower down in the organization. When you get to EXCO, we ask you to converge this and never accept a single answer, because you have to ask the question, what if the economy doesn't hold? What if it rains for 3 weeks non-stop in Cape Town? So that our people can always ask the question, what else is missing? To give them the ability to be able to see around corners. That to me is our role, not as managers, but as leaders. If we're to get that right, maybe, just maybe, our people might be better led by a leadership that fully commits and deeply commits on the basis of full understanding. If we did only that, maybe, just maybe, we might be able to take our people by the scruff of their necks to bring them into the 21st centuries, where the three priorities for organizations of the future might actually find traction. About embracing digital tools, achieving agility because it rhymes with stability, because there are only two types of companies, the quick and the dead. And then lastly, to start developing the new kinds of leaders, leaders of the 21st century, who are already thinking about work that doesn't even exist today. If we were to get that right, maybe, just maybe, we might be able to bring effect to the 4 baseline behaviors. One, how can we better facilitate team collaboration much more effectively, so that we demonstrate our obsession with our people, because the company is the people, not the bricks and mortar, nor the products and services that they produce, so that we can champion the desired change. Lastly, to be able to provide critical perspectives. Because if you hire only people that look like you, that smoke the same brand of cigarette as you, who come from the same private school as you, you are probably depriving yourself an opportunity to grow. So where you can bring it down to what do we talk about in companies to realize this ultimate potential of a nation, beyond just in our boards where we discuss so that we decide in order to do, where the mantra is less paper and more substance. So for me, I like Jack Welch's understanding of trust, because he describes it as the degree of confidence born of character and competence of either a person or an organization. So the opposite of trust for me is suspicion. Trust happens when leaders are transparent, are candid, and keep their word. For me, it is just that simple. It is the realization that you cannot talk yourself out of a situation that you behaved yourself into. So going back to the Constitution as I conclude, I see a golden thread from the Constitution to the broad-based Black Economic Empowerment Strategy document and the NDP 2030, where I said we ought to be getting our marching lines. The obsession of all of us must surely be, how do we give effect to the South Africa of Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela's dreams so that we can realize nation building in our lifetime, where people need to taste in their everyday lives the fruits of democracy and good governance. So as business, we really stand only for three things. So first is, how can we give effect to inclusive economic growth, not just radical economic transformation, and stop the narrative of white monopoly capital? Because most of our businesses are run by people that look like me. So first, I don't look like capital, let alone white. Secondly, how can we, all of us, and this is business, not politics, protect our constitution in general, our Chapter 9 institutions, and in particular the Office of the Public Protector? Because if we didn't, imagine how much trouble would be. We're already in trouble. But without Thuli Madonsela, some of us didn't even know that there was the Office of the Public Protector. And then lastly, how do we posit business as a national asset so that business can speak with one voice? So isn't it amazing that this current president that has brought us this catastrophic crisis by recalling business, labor, civil society on a roadshow designed to promote investment into the country, sitting in front of the three rating agencies, but also the investors, analysts, the people who are going to help with this most deeply borrowed country, where we are borrowed to the tune of more than 50% of our GDP, up from 20 in Mandela and Mbekis's time. And then 3 years later did their most wholesale cabinet reshuffle, bigger than even at the time of the National Party rule, leading only to one predictable and known consequence, which is the double downgrades, which will ultimately lead us into recession, where the rent will probably tank, CPI will increase. When your repo rates will become more, you'll start paying more for a mortgage, but also for the people of Mondlo, Nkandla, and Ngutu will pay more for bread and milk. So to conclude, this president that shares more in common with P.W. Botha than with former presidents Mandela and P.W. Botha, that both of them are securocrats, come from rural areas, no tertiary education, therefore uneducated, unlearned, and unlettered, therefore lacks the real appreciation of how South Africa tessellates like a jigsaw puzzle within a broader scheme of things, and simply no understanding of how the world works at a time that the world is rapidly globalizing, with some challenges, especially with the Black Swan events that we've seen. So unless all of us work hard to reverse this, I think our children are going to disown us. I thought, let me end with Louis Wessel's words that ring true even today more than ever, when he was describing the situation in Auschwitz at that time, when he proclaimed that there are occasions in life when you can't be neutral. you have to take sides. I'm happy to take questions, comments, and some violent disagreements.